site.
10-4, Welcome to Law and Order BUX. I'm your host, Bucks County Sheriff Fred Harran. Every corner of Bucks County has a story to tell. Sometimes a story of resilience. Sometimes a story that chills us to the bone. Sometimes a story of government not being able to get out of its own way. Here, the forces of law and order are constantly at work, often behind the scenes. Join us as we delve into the gripping realities of crime and justice in our community. We'll explore the hidden worlds, the difficult decisions, and the unwavering commitment it takes to maintain law and order right here in Bucks County. Hi, and welcome to episode 23 of Law and Order BUX, BUX. And I am your host, your Sheriff, Fred Harran, and I'm very excited. I can tell you, episode 23, this was originally scheduled as episode 2 or 3, but this young lady that's joining us today, who I'm sure most of you know, but I'm going to introduce her, has been very, very busy, and I'm sure she's going to hopefully go into that with one of her most recent cases that made headlines around the region and probably much further reaching. And we will hear from this much later in law enforcement and the prosecution world, this particular case. But I am proud to announce not only my friend, but who I've known for 26 years, but our amazing district attorney, Jennifer Schorn. Jennifer is Miss Schorn is our district attorney. She's been our district attorney since the previous DA became judge, Matt Weintraub, who we had on a couple episodes back, just so you know. But Jen has been here for 26 years. But I'm just going to say this, and I'm going to get her talking because nobody wants to hear me. She is an amazing prosecutor. And I've said this a bunch of times when Jen and I are out together at different events. She truly has a very special quality about her, and that is she is a hardcore prosecutor, a tough prosecutor, hard on crime, knows how to make a community safe. She's got her DAs in her office. That's their marching orders, I imagine, because they all do a fantastic job in her office. But that's what she's supposed to do. But here's the extra part that we get with Jen, and that is she also knows how to make a victim feel whole. She knows how, after a victim has been victimized or somebody has lost something, she knows how to give them that self-worth back, how to bring peace to that family, how to bring rest to that relationship, to that inner circle of one who has become a victim, how to make that person whole and get them back on track. And not a lot of people can do that, let alone prosecutors that have both those qualities. And I'm going to be quiet because no one wants to hear me after 23 episodes. This is who they want to hear. I want to introduce Jen Schorn. She's going to take us back to the beginning, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that she's doing now. So, District Attorney Schorn, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Fred, and please call me Jen. We'll keep it real, the way you and I have known one another for 26 years in the mutual respect. So please call me Jen. I apologize that I have not been able to be on the show sooner. As you now know, I couldn't share the reasons why, the one in particular, but we had been working for quite some time to try to bring peace and justice and provide answers to the only surviving family member of Carol Ann Dougherty. She was a 9-year-old little girl who, living in Bristol Borough, attending school at St. Mark's, which is still very much there along the river in Bristol Borough, as you know well, a beautiful little community that Bristol Borough is. She was a 5th grader at St. Mark's and daughter to Frank and Dorothy Dougherty, and she was a big sister to Kay, and Kay is her surviving sister. And on October 22nd of 1962, Carol Ann biked into the center of town. She lived just in neighboring Bristol Township, about a mile out from the center of town. and she was meeting friends at the library. She was an avid reader, and I thought it was just so heartbreaking to know this, that, and it just brings you back to a more innocent time of that. She was done her books in the mystery series that she so loved. And so naturally, you got to go to the library to renew the next, to get the next installment in that series. And, it's not like our kids today where they're just on their phones. And if they are avid readers, they can just download a book on their phone. She couldn't wait. And on this particular day, her neighbor typically would bike in with her, and her neighbor was a seventh grader, so quite a big difference in age, almost 3 years older than Carol Ann. And so that's something that's not lost on me, that it was, the circumstances were just so unfortunate. Carol Ann was biking into town, and it was a safe neighborhood, so not certainly, placing blame on her parents for allowing her to do so. And the goal was to meet her two friends at the library. And we know her exact path. We know she went down Farragut. She passed Jerome's Market on McKinley, went down Farragut, stopped in Tommy's Cafe. And this part gets me every time, that she went in, got a Coke and penny candy, just screams 1962 and a little 9-year-old girl. And certainly as a mom, when I started this case, my daughter was the exact same age and in fifth grade, goes to Catholic school. It really resonated.
Wow.
And so she gets her penny candy. She continues on her bike, her, favorite bike, which is a racing bike, down Farragut, and then ultimately she turns onto Lincoln. And we know eyewitnesses see her pedaling fast on Lincoln, and we know that she's last seen alive outside of the front main entrance of St. Mark's, so right on Radcliffe Street there. And what we don't know is, did she go into St. Mark's that day because she was already being chased by someone, which is definitely a theory that we have, because she knew it was a place that she frequented often and it was always unlocked. And we also know, though, the other counter theory is that the nuns at her school encouraged all the kids, if you're riding by, just stop in, say a quick prayer. And we know Carol Ann loved to go up to the choir loft to say her prayer. Something tells us on this particular day, though, that she was hiding up in that loft and that she was being pursued, because of the fact that we know that the housekeeper for St. Mark's was in the church tending to some flowers from a funeral service that was earlier in the day. And she saw a strange man come in. And, the fact that he was a stranger to the housekeeper means something in Bristol Borough. One, he's not a member of St. Mark's. Two, that he's not someone that's known to the housekeeper, who was from Bristol Borough, and as you know, still is to this day a very tight knit community. So the housekeeper felt so uneasy with this stranger in the church, and she thought, meaning the housekeeper thought, she was alone with this strange man. So that leads me to believe Carol Ann was already hiding up in the choir loft. Instead, her friends said typically when she would go up and pray, she would pray over the half wall of the choir loft, looking out over the altar. And so she was not seen by the housekeeper, and the housekeeper felt unusual being in this, something about this particular stranger being in the church alone. So the housekeeper leaves, which is heartbreaking. And we know that shortly thereafter, at some point, those main doors are locked from the inside. And we know that Carol Ann is raped and murdered. And you can't even imagine the scene. And you've seen so many scenes, Fred, and so many heartbreaking things. And I think the day we become desensitized to it is the day that you and I have to stop doing our jobs. You
You're
know,
right.
you then there's something wrong. If you can't, if your emotions don't, get a hold of you, seeing the naked body from the waist down of a little girl who was forcibly raped, a little girl who had not developed at all, prepubescent, and she had a little headband on and belts through her pants and penny loafer type shoes, and just heartbreaking. And to know that she was violated in the worst way possible, and then took her last breath in that sacred place, that place that meant so much to her. Her father was a practicing Catholic, and her little sister and her father, they would routinely pray every Sunday there, but through school regularly. Her mom was a Christian, but not practicing and not Catholic. So just the irony of that, the sacred place that meant something so much to her and her family, ended up being the place where she took her last breath and suffered the most unimaginable death. We know she was asphyxiated with a belt, and a belt that was not her own belt, because her belt was still through the belt loops of her little pants. And it was so severe that the belt buckle actually left an imprint on her neck. And there she was, left discarded like trash. And like, as if it could not get more heartbreaking, when she didn't meet up with her friends at the library, her little friends got on their bikes to bike around town, and they immediately saw Carol Ann's racing bike, because I guess it was like the envy of her friends. parked outside St. Mark's. So they sat outside waiting. They didn't go in because they needed head coverings back in the 60s. So they waited for their friend. And I believe while they were sitting on those steps waiting, she was being raped and murdered. And we know then when they actually asked like a passerby, hey, do you have a bobby pin? Because they were going to try to fashion little paper towels or napkins as head coverings to go in, and they couldn't make it work. So they just sat there waiting and eventually left. And when Carol Ann didn't come home for dinner, and her family had pretty like a set dinner time, 4:45 was you were expected to be home and ready to sit down for dinner. Her mom first came looking but didn't find her, but saw her bike outside the church, went in the main part of the church, but doesn't know the church like her father. So her mom went back. The father, baby sister, and mom went to that church, and dad's, searched everywhere in that church. And he was the one to discover his daughter's body in the most unimaginable way, in the most unimaginable state. And it was evident that she had been violated, and it was evident that it was not likely she was still that there was any life left in her. And one of the things in this investigation, when we put this case into the grand jury, which I'm jumping ahead a little bit, we had her sister Kay testify. And Kay's parents have passed, never knowing who was responsible for Carol Ann's murder. But Kay was not even 3, but her memory of her father getting in that car and just keening, and she said it
Mm.
didn't sound human. And he was just pleading with his wife, don't go in, don't go in, don't see our daughter that way, don't see our little girl that way. And just Kay, when Kay started describing that to the grand jurors, I don't think there was dry eye in there, because this, Kay, 63 years later, and
Oh,
Kay
wow.
remembered it like it was yesterday. So Carol Ann's body was discovered by her father. There was no life left in her. The police were immediately called after a neighbor doctor came over and confirmed what Carol Ann's dad already believed. And the investigation began, but it was thwarted. There were some initial suspects, and it managed to allow the actual perpetrator, who we finally identified yesterday, William Schrader. It managed to allow him to fly under the radar and quite frankly get away with it. And I can get into more details, but I just don't want to, yeah, it's a heartbreaking
Yeah.
case.
Unbelievable. Now, I'm just curious because obviously, this is when I opened with you here. You could see it. I mean, I could see it in your face. I can hear it in your voice that you have submerged yourself in this. I mean, you have. This is in your bloodstream. In this case, I could feel it in your bloodstream. I'm curious if any these little girls that were outside the church that day on their bikes, are they still alive? I mean, they're in their 60s.
They're still
So
alive. They're
were
still alive.
they
In fact,
I don't know if you're allowed to say or not. Are they involved in this case at this point?
they first of all, they gave the most detailed information, incredibly useful information that we were able to use. And I'm going to absolutely sing the praises of my investigative team on this case, and I'll get into more detail. But yes, both little girls still very much alive, and they're closer to 70, 71, because they were the same age as Carol Ann, slightly older than Carol Ann, so definitely older than Kay. And also the little best friend in the neighborhood, who was the 12-year-old girl who was 2.5 years older than Carol Ann, who couldn't attend, is still alive and gave a great interview
Yeah.
this past year, just recently. And
Unbelievable.
she remembered the book. She remembered the books that Carol Ann, and we have obviously the books, and we have images of the books preserved over the decades. But it was really kind of heartbreaking to hear, Connie, her best friend from the neighborhood, her account of, well, Carol Ann loved these mystery series, but I love the Bobbsey twins and a medical nursing series. And so I wasn't done my series yet. So I didn't want to go to the library until I was done my series. So that's why Carol Ann biked in that day alone, because
Yeah.
she was eager to renew her book. So all 3 of these girls, all these women are alive and were very, very helpful in throughout the decades, but certainly their initial interviews and then the more recent conversations and interviews had. And yeah, it's heartbreaking to know that the collateral impact, this was not just a crime that impacted the Dougherty family. And when you hear how it just defined Kay's childhood, and both parents, Kay's mother died when Kay was only 15. So I have to believe, and her mom
Oh,
was in her early 50s. I have to believe it slowly killed her. And her father lived just there were points in time that he would not leave. Decades later, when he thought the case was going to be solved, he would not leave their home for fear. They moved out of the area, but he was so afraid he'd miss the call that they finally solved the case. And obviously, he went to his grave without having those answers.
I can't begin to imagine, and you talk about at the beginning, this was 1962, was it?
1962,
Yeah.
October 22nd. And Fred, I kid you not, this was not by design. We had hoped to wrap this up a lot sooner, but there were some, impediments beyond our control, and there were some scheduling matters. The grand jury takes a summer recess, and so we couldn't wrap it up. And when we looked at the date and we knew we were going to be concluding this investigation in the grand jury, it was 63 years and 1 day after her murder. It was crazy.
Crazy.
Just
And,
coincidence.
you said in the beginning, and people, many of the viewers are probably younger folks on, listening to this podcast as well. But I was born in '64, and I would go out, on my bike on a Saturday morning and not come back till the streetlights came on.
Right.
So it's not unusual for a child just to go out for the day and play, because the neighborhoods were safer back then. There wasn't the same type of dangers that are out there now. And now, people have the trackers, find my iPhone, all that stuff. So, that's just the way it was back then. As I don't really know much about the case. I know you've been, obviously it was in grand jury, so I don't know about the case, but how did you find the doer, the bad guy?
So I have to praise all of the investigative work done throughout the years, and I need to be clear on that. And you and I have worked on cases. You authorized your department when you were director of public safety in Ben Salem to and Detective McMullen to work on the Barbara Owen case, and
Yeah.
very much like that, it's someone making the decision to allow for resources to be allocated to a case to look at all pieces of evidence recovered to see if there's a forensic break. But quite frankly, I've never been so lucky as to have a forensic break. We hear them, reported on the news, throughout the
Right.
country. But sometimes it's just having the right, it's the right timing, the right team, and that's to not to suggest that others had failures. That we have the benefit of hindsight, and we have the benefit of picking up the ball on the field where it was left off, and often they carried it 90% of the way down the field. And so
Right.
in this case, it was clear the investigators did such a comprehensive, thorough investigation throughout, and that's Bristol Borough, the Pennsylvania State Police from the early days. But oddly enough, there were four individuals, three originally identified as suspects, and William Schrader not being one of the three, who all had varying degrees of either sexual deviance or allegations of sexual deviance, and either ties directly to the church or the immediate area. And in one case, one of the suspects actually didn't end up having ties to the community, but he was developing as a deviant sexual offender at 18. As a young child, he was perpetrating sex crimes upon his younger siblings, half siblings. And I think his parents were so horrified with how he was developing that they thought maybe he had a connection. And they thought maybe he had seen a recruiter in Bristol Borough, which he may have, but it had no bearing on this case. So Bristol Borough and the state police were, facing the perfect storm of the most heinous crime, the likes, literally, we don't believe anything like it has ever happened in the country involving a little girl. We believe there's one other murder of a little boy, 13 years old, in a church, but we think it's the only rape and murder of a younger child. Not to suggest that the other case isn't horrific, but that's how extremely rare a stranger attack like this is, and then for it to occur in such a you know, place that's sacred to so many, but also in such a reckless manner, an
Yeah.
impulsive manner. So they had an unbelievable challenge on their hands, and so because there was this initial suspect, and the initial suspect was slow, and English wasn't his first language, and he wasn't highly educated. He went to school either to the fourth or fifth grade, and after hours of questioning, he ultimately said what they wanted him to say, and then recanted immediately. But he was held in custody, and people largely believed in the first 24 to 48 hours that he was responsible. And in fact, it was later learned he had an ironclad alibi, and he was also a drunk, and he had low level of like indecent
It,
exposure type crimes. No
yeah.
hands on per. Yeah, but that's
And
worth
1992, 1962 is pre-Miranda too, right?
Free
So
Miranda. Yes, you nailed it. And great instincts. And even then they looked at the way the interrogation was done, and the more experienced, skilled people said this is coercive. There were 8 people interviewing him, 8. And so, given all of those circumstances and the pre-Miranda and ultimately confirming his alibi, obviously within 24, 48 hours, they realized this is not our perpetrator. But those 24 to 48 hours let critical, like eyewitness testimony that could have been had, identifying any suspicious behavior in the area, which we
Right.
now know there was. We identified 2 women who saw, without a doubt, William Schrader based on the description and based on the behavior, not even knowing there was a murder, and they reported him the next day. But unfortunately, believed they already had their guy, if that makes sense.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Oh, and just so our viewers know, when we say the words pre-Miranda, Miranda is the Miranda warnings, the Miranda rights, you have the right to remain silent, all those things. So this was pre that court case, that Supreme Court case. So that really wasn't clear back then. But when did he die? Maybe you said it. I don't.
He died in 2002 at the age of 62. And one of the things that I'm got to deviate for 1 second to talk about the team of investigators.
Sure.
So we had 3 troopers from the Pennsylvania State Police, because they were one of the original jurisdictions that were assigned to this case, which was not uncommon. In the 60s, Bristol Borough was a small community, and they needed resources. And so we had 3 troopers who, none of them were born in the 60s and probably none in the 70s even, but respectively, 7 years, one committed to this case, the other 7 years, and the newer of the 3, 4 years. And myself and my colleague Christopher Reese from the attorney side of things were assigned to this case. Before I was DA, we were reviewing this case, and then Lieutenant Timothy Perkins from my office is the county detective within the last year and a half. And just and one of the simple things we did, and I credit Chief Joe Moores, just getting all of the evidence from Bristol Borough, all of the evidence from my office, and all the evidence and reports and lab reports from the state police, and having one central repository so we could be working off of the same script, not
Right.
script, but like, so
Wow.
we could review everything as a whole. And that revealed that there were things that still could be done, and it allowed them to do the deepest of dives into the criminal history of William Schrader once it was clear that the other suspects were properly vetted and, in fact, not criminally culpable in this crime, no association to the crime whatsoever. But for good reasons, they were suspects. So it allowed for us to do a really hyper-focused look back into William Schrader's life, both prior to the rape and murder of Carol Ann, and then the history after is just, it's hard to even speak about how
Oh,
bad this man was.
yeah.
So he died in 2002.
Are any of I'm trying to do the math in the head, so it's possible. Are any of the original investigators still alive?
Yeah, well, not original, no. But some that have handled it in the, maybe a decade or 2 after.
Okay. I mean,
Yes.
the cops would be in their 90s, probably.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Chief Faragelli was someone that became very special to the Dougherty family, and Kay mentioned that yesterday at the press conference, just praising him. He kept that framed photograph of Carol Ann with him on his desk every day he worked, and then when he retired, he took it with him. Just knowing that how much that case impacted him and the inability to solve it, and not certainly placing blame. But yeah, they were committed. I have to say that that was not the case. This was incredibly thorough. Unfortunately, we have the benefit of hindsight, and we have the benefit of technology,
Oh,
not just
yeah.
like the forensic break, but just even the technology to access historical records in
Yeah.
such detail to paint a picture. And the picture of William Schrader, Fred, you can't even believe. I mean, the violence at age 8, that he inflicted on little girls, and clubbing them in the face, stomping on them just because he could, that caused him to be placed in a reform school pretty much for the entirety of his
Well,
youth. And then it just
it,
gets worse.
it's crazy. And, a side note, when we've talked about other things in law enforcement and mental health, I use in one of my talks, I quote Ben Franklin identifying the mental health crisis in Pennsylvania. That's right. The Benjamin Franklin. Identify. I mean, I have quotes I use from Ben Franklin. And so these monsters and bad individuals have lived on from a decade to decade. But, as I said, Jen, you're working on this case, and once you get it, I knew there was going to be closure, and everybody deserves their day in court. That day could be tomorrow, or that day could be 60 years, but everybody deserves, their day in court. And, I know for sure you are, because even before you were DA, as you alluded to, working with Chris McMullen and others in Bensalem. And I know there's still a couple open cold cases in Bensalem. And I'm sure throughout the county, there are a handful. But I know you work on them, and you believe that everybody deserves, justice, whether they're still on this planet or not. They deserve, and families deserve justice. In this case, her sister was still alive. Is she living in Bucks, Jen?
The family moved out of the area about 2.5 hours away, but
Okay.
Bucks County is still so important to her, and yeah, it was such a privilege to get to know her, and I think we'll stay in touch probably for the rest of our
Good.
lives. She just was remarkable, and like I said, Trooper Rhodes, Trooper Cleveland, Trooper Bear, and Tim Perkins, they were great ambassadors as well as investigators. Meaning, had to fly down and interview people in Louisiana who talked about being sexually victimized by William Schrader, who was a family member, as little girls. And some of those family members never disclosed to even their own adult children and suffered in silence. And they were able to unearth those other crimes. And it doesn't just happen, it happens with the right people at the right time and just being committed. And what we have established is that from as early as 8 until the day he died, this man perpetrated the most heinous sexual crimes on little girls. He actually killed another little girl after getting away with the murder of Carol Ann when he fled south and established roots ultimately in Louisiana. He killed another little girl, and the circumstances are that we could probably fill up with a whole nother 30-minute episode.
Well, this is just unbelievable. And as we've got maybe like 5 minutes left, I try to keep these to 30 to 40 minutes for the viewers here. But I'm so grateful that you were able to go into so much detail on this case. The bad news is we really didn't get into all the other stuff that you do. But great work on this. Can you give our viewers a little overview of the district attorney's office? Like, I know you've got, how it's broken down a little bit, how many investigators, how many lawyers and support staff that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 42 attorneys working out of my office, working for the district attorney. We have about 55 outstanding members of our support staff that are support both to the attorneys and to our detectives. And then we have 26 outstanding detectives, our chief of county detectives, deputy chief, and then 24 detectives who work for the district attorney's office, working in conjunction, as you know, with all of the municipal police agencies when the need arises. So by and large, probably with the exception of only Bensalem, I mean, with every homicide, they're going out. Bensalem, obviously, all of our police are outstanding in Bucks County, but some are smaller departments than others. So, we often need to and want to lend resources because we're, together so much stronger. It's a force multiplier. So yeah, I think I've still the biggest law firm in Bucks County, and pretty big police department in Bucks County, and amazing support staff and police, but not in your traditional sense, obviously not patrol and
Well,
uniform.
you certainly have the biggest investigative unit in Bucks County. I mean,
That's right.
when I left Bensalem, there were 15 detectives. So I don't know if they've upped that or not, but you certainly, I remember that. I'll never, I shouldn't say not funny, but I guess, um, when I was in Bensalem, whoever the chief of county detectives was at the time, I knew, when they got a call from me on a Saturday or 2 o'clock in the morning, the first thing they don't say hello, how you doing? The first thing they would always say, every single chief would be, "This ain't a good call."
You just know it. Yep. When you see the time and who's calling, exactly.
They're
Exactly.
like, "This is going to be a long couple of days."
Yep, to brace yourself. But it's
This
really,
is
I think, what we are so fortunate, Fred, in Bucks, and you can certainly speak to this with your 39 years of experience and being the municipal police chief of the chief director of public safety of the biggest municipal police department in Bucks, is, we as a Chiefs Association, which I love being a part of, and I know you've been a part of for quite some time, but and just generally our every detective division or patrol officers who investigate, we work so closely together, our, law enforcement in the traditional sense and the prosecutors. And that's not the case everywhere. We have a working relationship that makes us both better. So if your detectives call in the middle of the night, or your sheriff's deputies call in the middle of the night, we have an on-call DA to help, issue spot a legal issue that may dictate how you approach an interview. We talked about Miranda before, or how you, whether or not you have probable cause or exigency to search a home, a vehicle, whatever it may be. And as a result, then we forge those relationships early. So by the time the case is now in trial, that prosecutor and that investigator have worked together now often for months, and if in a homicide for sometimes over a year. So
Yeah.
it makes us stronger, and that's unique. That
Yeah.
is not the case
You,
everywhere.
you're absolutely right. And I know you've met with the Bucks County superintendents, and the first time to say hello to somebody is not the day of an incident.
Right.
So those relationships in our world are worth $1 million. I mean, they are just priceless. Not a million, priceless, because the day of an incident, we used to do it in Bensalem with police, fire, and EMS, meeting all the time, because it's the day of the, oh my God, it's not, hey, my name is Fred Harran, glad to meet you. That's not the day to do that. Jen, you guys do a phenomenal job in your department, and you do work so well with everybody. And I just got to take it back to where you started. I live in Bristol Borough now. I'm down the street from St. Mark's, right on the river there. And Joe Moores and his crew, the men and women, Bristol Borough Police Department, I mean, they just do a phenomenal job. And they have probably more events than any other town in Bucks County, including probably New Hope. And New Hope's probably second as far as events and stuff. But Bristol Borough, there's always something going on in that town. And Joe just does a phenomenal job. And unlike probably 1962, he's now got detectives there. Where in 1962 they were using I don't know what Bensalem. I don't know if Bensalem was incorporated in, I think, 54. It's been it certainly has changed in Bucks County. But listen, I'm going to have to bring you on maybe in a month or two and really start talking about some drugs and other things that your department does, because you've got a crackerjack drug squad. What do you call? It's not drug. What do you guys call them?
Our strike force, our drug
strike force.
force.
Yeah, drug strike force. Drug strike force. But so many other things that you do there. And I certainly, one episode is not enough for you. But I'm so glad you got to talk about the case, because people really like hearing about that stuff. And I think it's important on the work that you do. These things don't happen overnight. Can you give me a timeline from when you were re-engaged? Just real quick, not a timeline, but how many months or years from when you guys decided to reopen this case, so to speak? How long was it?
Well, I would say with the Pennsylvania State Police, it has been ongoing for years. With our office, it probably was about 4 or 5 years ago initially, with the hope of a DNA break, and then but it helped us then focus and prioritize that case. Personally speaking, for me, probably 2 years. My colleague Chris Reese, slightly longer, and then we complemented our team because of his vast experience, Lieutenant Perkins, and it was a pleasure to work with that team, because we knew that, this family deserves answers, and
Yeah.
Carol Ann deserves to rest in peace, and her parents deserve to rest in peace. And to have a day like yesterday when we could finally publicly say we were able to provide those answers, that
Yeah.
those are the days that define, why you do the job. And even if no one were to ever know about it, but we could provide those answers to our family, it was worth every minute spent late at night and on the weekends. So thank you. I
Well,
really appreciate you.
oh my God, great work.
coming
And
on.
folks, I just want to make sure you caught the timeline. She said she didn't say 2 months and 4 months. She said 2 years and 4 years. And this is one case. And there's more in Bucks County. And she is working on cases with her team every day, serious cases, drug, drug death investigations, drug dealing investigations, manufacturing investigations, trafficking investigations, human trafficking investigations, and everything else that comes in to play. I mean, every case gets through her desk theoretically. And Jen, your signature has just been on every case in the county, I believe.
It is.
So That's not a signature you want coming through the mail. If you see Jen Schorn's envelope coming in the mail, that's normally not going to be good news, I would imagine. But
You were right.
Jen, I know you're crazy busy right now, and you got a million things going on. I certainly appreciate you taking the time, folks. This is one of our amazing guests appearing. I've been trying to get her from day one, but she's been so busy. Now we know why. Jen Schorn, our district attorney. I look forward to working with you for the next 4 years, Jen. I'm so excited that you're here in Bucks County. And until next time, folks, this is episode 23. Your Sheriff Fred Harran with our district attorney and my good friend Jen Schorn signing off for Law and Order BUX. Until then, everybody be careful and God bless you and God bless this great county and country of ours.
Thank you, Sheriff. Appreciate it, Fred.
Thank you for joining us as we explore another aspect of law enforcement in Bucks County. To stay up to date on future episodes and gain further insight into the work we do, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about the Bucks County Sheriff's Office and the services we provide, please visit our website and be sure to download the official Bucks County Sheriff's Office app, available on Google Play and in the App Store. Join us next time for another in-depth look at law and order right here in Bucks County.